Today we are in week 3 of our series, You're Not the Boss of Me. And the byline of this series is how to say no to the emotions that compete for control in our lives. We all have emotions. They all either under the surface, either we're really good at kind of shoving them down or masking them in some way, or sometimes we're not so good because they kind of erupt out of us. We all have emotions inside of us that at times compete for control in our lives. And so we're talking about a little one of those, a lot of these emotions over the course of this series. And so this is week 3 of this series. I got a question. How many people are on Instagram? I mean, not like right this second, but just in general, right? You can be on Instagram. You can take whatever, right? Like, this is awesome. Please, don't be like, hey, this is the worst thing I've ever seen. Take a look. That wouldn't be advised. I wouldn't like to know. It's going to happen now. Great. No, Instagram is really good, but here's the problem I have with Instagram, right? I find that there are things that I've never really thought about that I absolutely need by watching Instagram. And this is not just true of Instagram, but this is true of a lot of different mediums. But right, I see that there are shoes that somehow all of a sudden I desire now because I'm on Instagram. I see that there are celebrities from reality TV shows that my friends like. And so therefore I am inundated with these pictures as if I really want to see what all the cast of The Bachelorette is actually doing in their everyday life. I find that out from Instagram. I didn't know that I needed shiplap before Instagram. That's just a real thing in my life. I didn't know that I needed that. I didn't know that I needed, I didn't know that this, but I didn't know how many different types of exercise routines and nutritional supplements there actually are without actually looking at Instagram. I look at those all the time. I'm like, oh my goodness. All these influencers just making us buy everything. I'm obviously have not purchased many of those. But we have a lot of that in there. And when on Instagram, I'm kind of bothered by all the vacations that maybe you have taken or other people have taken that I suddenly, I've never traveled to, and I suddenly kind of want to go to those places. I'm influenced by I'm troubled by all these cool preachers in their overpriced sneakers. I don't know if you've seen that, preachers in sneakers. It's kind of a don't go there, please don't go there. And the temptation is just this. I'm going to get out. I'm going to quit. If you've ever thought about quitting a social media platform, I'm not going to out you right here. But I think to some degree, I know I have. Should I just quit? And then I thought, you know what? I'm not a quitter. What I'm going to do is I'm going to up my game. I'm going to make you as discontent with your life as you have made me about my life. I'm going to up it. I'm going to post my filtered, cropped, edited, touched up photos. That's just a highlight reel of my life, and it's going to make you jealous. I'm going to up my game. The great thing about Instagram is it reminds me that there really is no win in comparison. There's really no win in comparison. And so today, part 3 of our series, You're Not the Boss of Me, we're going to talk a little bit about a subject that I think this really hits home on. Because all of us have emotions that kind of compete for control in areas of our lives that kind of come specifically, we need control over our mouths because that's kind of where they come out of, as we've talked about. And our mouths get us into trouble because we let these emotions be the boss of us. And this is what Jesus said. This is our kind of text for this whole series. This is found in the book of Matthew. Matthew was a tax collector that Jesus called to follow him. He left everything and followed him. He wasn't the most popular person to do, in the world, in that culture at that time. In fact, people despised tax collectors, much like you probably do today. But this was his life, and Jesus said, "Hey, follow me," and he followed him. And here's the thing about Matthew is that he had people around him who could write, who could scribe, who knew different languages. So it was perfect. It was very strategic that Jesus had him follow him because now Matthew writes this account of Jesus' life, and this is what we find. One of Jesus' teachings in the 15th chapter of Matthew. It says this. It says, "Don't you see whatever enters the mouth goes into a person's stomach and comes out of the body? But the things that come out of a person's mouth come from the heart. These are what defile them. These are what puts you at odds with God because it puts you at odds with others. And he kind of clarifies this. These, the things that come out of the heart come evil thoughts. And we might be able to kind of push back and be like, you know what, Jesus, our thoughts aren't always evil, but and that's true. But out of the heart come evil thoughts. And he gives some examples. Evil thoughts such as murder, adultery, sexual immorality, theft, false testimony, slander. In other words, our words and deeds reflect the condition of our hearts. It reflects the condition of our hearts. It out of our heart kind of spews out things, and we talked about this in week 1. It's like, you know what? I didn't mean to say that. I didn't mean to do that. I don't know where that came from. These are kind of typical things that we often say. Like, you know me. That's not, anybody who knows me knows that I'm not really like that. Like, no, you are, because it's in your heart. You're like that. I can forgive you, but be aware of yourself. I didn't mean to say that out loud to you, but I meant to kind of think it. Like, this is the kind of stuff that Jesus is talking about that's in our hearts. Our words and our deeds reflect the condition of our hearts. And if you didn't know where that came from, you do now. You do now. Because in this series, we are saying that we cannot allow the destructive forces from within that lurk within to kind of seize control of our lives. Instead, we need to deal with it. And last week, we focused on guilt, the concept of guilt, and how guilt feels like weight. And we talked about that a lot. So if you want to catch up on last week, you can catch up online or on the One Church app. That was a great topic. But today, we are going to focus on another topic. We're going to talk about envy. We're going to talk about envy. King Solomon. Solomon was the son of David, the King David. David, beat Goliath, and we have all the story of King Solomon. He was considered the wisest person in the world at that time. He didn't hold back when he wrote this. He wrote this in the book of Proverbs. He says, envy rots the bones. Envy rots the bones. Why? Because envy leaves us competing with people that don't even know that there's a competition. Envy leaves us competing with people who don't even know that they're in a competition, right? Like, it makes us arrogant because we're winning, or it leaves us discouraged because we're not. That's the power of envy. It can make us prideful. It can make us arrogant because somehow we're competing against a person who doesn't know that they're competing against us. And if we're beating them in our minds, whoever the judge is, but we are the judge, right? We're like, if we're beating them in our minds, we're like, oh man, I'm awesome. Okay, great. I'm better than they are. I'm arrogant. I'm prideful. But if we're not, we feel so discouraged and so depressed and starts to eat at us. Envy rots the bones. There was a church planter a guy who started a church in Texas, and he was in the same kind of, I'm going to call it draft class as me. It's not really how it works. But we went to these trainings together, and we were in the same kind of class that was training together to future church planters. They were teaching us all the nuts and bolts of this thing that we felt like God had put on our lives to do, which was to start a church in a city, wherever he had called us to go. And in my case, it was St. Louis. In his case, it was Texas, specifically Houston. And this pastor now has, in the same time frame as what we've, the church that we've planted and started here in St. Louis, they have over 11,000 people on a weekly service. It is very hard for me to look at that guy's Instagram when I think about this topic. Not because of what I feel like, man, God, what are you doing? But because I feel like, okay, if I let this emotion eat at me, it's very easy for me to get discouraged and depressed by that. It's very simple to sit there and go down that rabbit hole, and that's not healthy for you. That's not healthy for me, to compare our lives to the highlight reel of somebody else's life. And that's kind of what that is. That's what envy is. So, it leaves us competing with people who don't know that they're in a competition with us. So the advice that I would give you is just knock it off. Stop doing that, okay? If only it was that easy. If only it was really that simple. Because this isn't going away, and this doesn't have to drive us. It doesn't have to control us. It doesn't have to steal our joy. It doesn't have to have that kind of control on our lives. Envy is not a problem to solve. It's a tension to manage. It's something that is there. It's going to be something that we all have to manage. We all have to kind of figure out how we're going to deal with it. And Solomon provides us with a place to go mentally and emotionally when we start to drift towards envy or discontentment. He gives us a word picture. He gives us a word picture to help us kind of regain our balance, because something important for us to remember is that all of these emotions, fear, guilt, anger, lust, envy, they throw us off balance. They throw us off course. They throw us kind of in this kind of whirlwind. And so Solomon gives us this outstanding word picture to what it looks like and how we can deal with this. And it's found in the book of Ecclesiastes. Now, Solomon was going through a little bit of a dark period when he wrote Ecclesiastes. He was super wise, and I think we're going to kind of hear this in what he's saying here. But it's something that he was kind of going through a hard time, and he started to evaluate what was important in life. That's what this whole book is. What's important in life? And this is what he says in Ecclesiastes chapter 4, verse 4. He's observing kind of the people around him. He says, I observed that most people are motivated to success because they envy their neighbors. That sounds like a TED Talk right there. Like I've observed, that can be applicable today. I've observed that most people are motivated to success because they envy their neighbors. That's what Instagram's all about, right? Like we envy our neighbors, and so we're like, okay, I gotta get better. That drives a lot of us to success, or it makes us go into despair. One of the two. And that's that's the danger of envy. 3,000 years ago, the same thing was going on. Everybody was competing. They were determining where they were based on where everybody else was. That's what they were doing. That's what we continue to do today. He goes on and says this. It says, but this too is meaningless. This is meaningless, like chasing the wind. There's that word picture. It's like chasing the wind. Chasing the wind. What a powerful word. It's something that we should kind of etch in our soul. It's endless. There's no finish line. There's no peace because there's always an There's always an right? His is nicer. Hers is better. It's bigger. It's faster. It's smarter. There's always an to something, and so it's never ending. There's never any finish, and because of that, there's never any peace. And we kind of get caught in this whirlwind. Dissatisfaction is there. Discontentment is guaranteed. It's always there. Envy steals the joy from our accomplishments because someone else accomplished more. It steals the joy from our accomplishments because someone else has accomplished more. When you can catch yourself looking and drifting into someone else's lane and say, hey, envy, you're not the boss of me, that's chasing the wind. I don't chase wind. That's sideways energy. It's a waste of time, and I'm not going to waste my life chasing the wind. On the other hand, this is not an invitation to passivity. This isn't saying, you know what, that's meaningless, therefore don't try at all, don't be productive at all, don't accomplish anything. That's not what Solomon is saying. He's saying, don't try to be like everybody else and measure yourself against everybody else because there's something for you. That's sideways energy. Solomon himself accomplished more in his lifetime than anyone who lived during his lifetime. This wasn't about his lack of accomplishments, but about how he viewed himself in light of other people's accomplishments. And that's the way we should take it. He goes on to talk about this. He says, he explains it a little bit more. He says, fools fold their idle hands, which leads them to ruin. Fools fold their idle hands, leading them to ruin. In other words, being non-productive isn't the answer. He brings these extremes together with this example. He says, better to have one handful with tranquility than two handfuls with hard work and chasing the wind. Better to have one handful with tranquility than 2 handfuls with hard work, but you're also chasing the wind with that hard work. You're motivated to succeed only because of what others are doing. Less is more, what he's saying. Less is more when it comes to contentment. The result is peace. Better is one hand with tranquility than grasping and striving and pretending and editing and cropping and retaking. Tranquility is simply satisfaction or contentment. And we assume more is better, but what he's saying is less is more. Chasing after the wind always creates us wanting more. And his point was less is more when it leads to contentment. He continues and says this, I observed yet another example of something meaningless under the sun. So this is the case of a man who is all alone without a child or a brother. The man, in essence, had no one to leave his estate to. And I know the natural question is, what about his wife? What about his daughters? That's another topic, but women couldn't inherit property in that culture. Yeah, that was bad. That's the point. He goes, there was no end to his toil, yet his eyes were not content on his wealth, with his wealth. There was no end to his hard work, yet his eyes weren't content. His life wasn't content with the things that he had built. He finally stopped and asked the question that some of us have never stopped to ask. Maybe you've stopped to ask this, but maybe you haven't stopped to ask this. And this is the question that this man asked, that Solomon observed. He says, for whom am I toiling? You probably haven't asked it exactly like that, right? You probably have asked something like, why am I doing this? Right? What am I trying to prove, and to whom am I trying to prove it? Some of you are competing with your father or your mother or your brother or your sister or your neighbor or whatever. Maybe you're competing for their approval. They don't even know it. They don't even know that that's what you're competing for. They don't even know that's what you're measuring yourself up against. For whom are you toiling? Who are you working for? He asks another question. Not only for whom am I toiling, but and why am I depriving myself of enjoyment? He couldn't stop and enjoy what he had, and he didn't know why. Perhaps we can't either. Right? Maybe perhaps we can't stop working. Maybe perhaps we can't stop driving ourselves, and we don't know why. Solomon says this too is meaningless. It is a miserable business, he says. It is depressing. It is depressing. You will never be who you were born to be as long as you're looking over your shoulder at everybody else. You will never be that person that you were created to be as long as you're looking over the shoulder. And if you're a Christian, this is even more serious. You'll never experience God's purpose for your life while you're distracted by God's purpose for somebody else. So when I was like going into that vein, and I was looking on Instagram, and I'm seeing this pastor who I look up to, I admire, I respect, man, they're killing it. They're reaching people for Jesus. It's awesome. And if I get down that lane and that rabbit hole where I'm like, oh man, I'm just depressed. I'm not worth anything. What am I even doing? Who am I working for? Why am I doing this? Who am I trying to do this for? That's dangerous. That's unhealthy. That's unhealthy. It's depressing. But I come to the realization that I can't compare myself with anybody else, because I'll never experience God's purpose for my life as long as I'm looking at over my shoulder and I'm distracted by God's purpose for somebody else's life. And that's true for every single one of us. You'll never experience that purpose when you're doing that. You have to remind yourself, envy, comparison. You are not the boss of me. The beginning, Solomon, we talked about how he said that envy rots the bones. There's a beginning part to that verse. He says, a heart that gives peace, at peace, gives life to the body. A heart at peace gives life to the body, but envy rots the bones. A heart at peace gives life to the body. Think about that. When you are restful, when you are refreshed, when you're at peace, when you're like, you know what, I'm good with what's going on. I'm living in the purpose that I feel like God's called me to live. Yeah, I'm good with that. And you're able to kind of just not be distracted by other people, and your heart's at peace. Oh man, that gives life to your body, right? That's something that just refreshes you, that you're able to rest then. You're able to kind of enjoy life then. There's something about that just kind of gives you just that kind of fresh air kind of feeling, that just deep sigh of just, that feels so good. But envy, on the other hand, rots the bones. It's always going to keep you working. It's always going to keep you toiling. It's always going to keep you driving. And we can misconstrue that into saying, you know what, that's drive. That's ambition. That's aspiration. There's nothing wrong with drive, ambition, and aspiration, but where is that coming from? Where are you getting that? Who are you working for? Why are you working for it? I want to give you 4 things as we kind of talk about envy and comparison that is really important for us to consider. I think these will be helpful for you in this area. And some of these things you're like, you know what, I agree with that. But I think there's a difference between agreeing with something and actually applying it and living it out. There's a lot of things that I agree with that I have a hard time living it out on a daily basis, right? And I have to remind myself and be like, you know what, that's right. That's, I need to do that. I need to do that. So this would be helpful for you. Here's the number 1 thing. You cannot compare or compete your way to peace. You can't compare or compete your way to peace. You can't do it. You cannot win by chasing the wind. You can't win that way. That's not how you get peace. Remember, a heart at peace gives life to the body, but envy rots the bones. You cannot win by chasing the wind. You cannot compare or compete your way to peace. God has given you a race to run. He said, if you're in your lane, you can stay there and thrive there. And you know what? You can change somebody's world from there. You can do it. You can do it. You cannot compare or compete your way to peace. The second thing is this: look to others for inspiration, not imitation. Look to others for inspiration, not imitation. It's so easy to get distracted in our kind of socially media-driven world to look to others and try to imitate them. But you can be inspired by somebody, but not necessarily imitate them. In fact, Paul says it this way. He says this in Galatians chapter 6. Paul, started churches all over the Mediterranean rim. He started churches. He wrote letters to churches to encourage them, the ones that he started. And this was a letter that he wrote to a church in the province of Galatia. And he wrote this, anyways, in chapter 6, we find this. It says, "Pay careful attention to your own work, for then you will get the satisfaction of a job well done. And you won't need to compare yourself to anyone else." Pay careful attention to your own work, for then you will get the satisfaction of a job well done, and you won't need to compare yourself to anyone else. This is Paul's way of saying, look at your own paper. Don't cheat. Get your eyes off my answers. Don't compare yourself. Pay careful attention to what you're doing, because then you're going to get the satisfaction for a job well done. Here's what I've noticed about imitation. When you imitate somebody else and it succeeds, you feel good temporarily. But you know in your heart of hearts that you kind of rode the coattails of somebody else's work. But when you do something that you're careful attention to your own work, you will get the satisfaction and the contentment of that job well done. And you're like, you know what? That was something incredible. I'm so glad I did it that way. And you're not going to need to compare yourselves to anybody else. Look to your others for inspiration, but not imitation. Here's the third one. Celebrate when you can't participate. Celebrate when you can't participate. This is a challenge for a lot of us, because envy will tell you that you secretly want the other person to lose so that you can internally feel like you're winning. Right? It says, hey, I want them to do good, but I don't want them to do so good, because that'll kind of creep them up on my level, and I don't want that at all. I want the spotlight to be on me. But what if we flipped it? What if, hey, I'm not involved in that. I'm not there. I can celebrate it. I can want the best for them. I can cheer them on from afar. When I can't participate in it, whether it's not what God's purpose is for my life, or whether I'm not physically there, I don't mourn that fact. I don't get just kind of beaten up by the fact that I can't be involved in that, or that that's not happening in my life. But what if I celebrate that? That is healthy. That gives life to the body. Celebrate when you can't participate. Jordan Peterson wrote this book called 12 Rules for Life. And this is what he says in this book. He says, compare yourself to who you were yesterday, not to who someone else is today. Compare yourself to who you were yesterday, not to somebody else today. In other words, are you improving? Are you growing? Are you getting better? Are you, where are you at compared to where you were, not to where someone else is? The danger in comparing yourself to who someone else is that you have no idea everything that plays into that person's life. It's like Instagram. It is the highlight reel of our life. We filter, we crop, we retake pictures. That's not the right angle. Oh, that one has a coffee cup in it. I don't want that coffee cup in it. Let's take it again. Let's get the lighting right. Let's make sure this is kind of working. And I'm going to show that. And everybody's like, oh, man, that's such an awesome picture. It took you like a half an hour to take that one picture. Maybe more. It's like you have no idea. And then the danger is with our lives, sometimes you don't know the pain that person has gone through, the struggle that person has gone through, the hustle that it took to get to where they are. Like you just want that highlight reel. Like, I want that. I need that. I deserve that. That's what we want. Compare yourself to who you were yesterday. How are you growing? And the last thing is this: count your blessings, not your neighbor's blessings. Count your blessings, not your neighbor's blessings. That will discourage you. When you're like, man, I wish I had the money that they have. I wish I had the kind of car that they have. I wish they had the kind of house they had, the job that they have, the life that they have, the family that they have. That is depressing and discouraging and leads you down a rabbit hole that's so unhealthy. But if you can count your blessings, that's going to give you peace. That's going to give you rest. It's going to give you, your heart's going to be at peace then. Don't miss what life has for you. Don't miss what God has for you. You will never experience life to the fullest until you decide to fully embrace the life that's in front of you. And when your mind drifts and your emotions start to get the best of you, when you are tempted to compare, just stop, and just kind of declare this statement like, envy, you are not the boss of me. I will not chase the wind. Besides, if you're a follower of Jesus, if you've made that decision to follow Jesus, you already have a boss of you. It's a better boss than envy. It's a better boss than guilt or fear or shame or any of that. And he's given us specific instructions. He says, don't compare yourself to one another. Just love one another. Just love one another. Because envy gets in the way of love. Loving one another is not just a nice thing to do. It's a must do. It's a must do. It's mission critical. Jesus said that people would know that you follow him because of how you love each other. It's a must do. People will know that you are his follower if you love, if you celebrate, if you cheer for, if you care for, and are there for one another. That's where peace and purpose and life are found. So let me ask you this. This is we're kind of going into this time of reflection today. Is it possible envy has become the boss of you? Is it possible in one relationship envy has become the boss of you? Not all of your relationships. Don't think about all of your relationships and be like, you know what, I'm good. This one's okay, not great, but all the rest of them are good, and so therefore I'm okay. Is it possible that in that one relationship, that envy is the boss of you? Maybe it's one environment. Is there one environment where envy has become the boss of you? Don't chase the wind. That's meaningless. If you do what's meaningless for too long, your life will become meaningless. If you do what's meaningless for too long, in the end, your life will lack meaning. Don't chase the wind. Follow Jesus. Click that follow button on Jesus' Instagram account. And don't unfollow Jesus. That's like sometimes we make the trick of like following and then unfollowing and following just to kind of build our follow count up. That's envy again, right? But we're tempted to unfollow when life gets difficult, or we want to hide, or we're kind of ashamed. And kind of our culture has made it popular to kind of unfollow and then follow and follow from a distance and follow but not really tell people that we're following, or kind of mask that. But just follow him. Just follow Jesus. Unlike envy, he will make your life better. And unlike envy, he will make you better at life. Let me pray for you this morning.